Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to look at patterns for the greater Exodus because we will know the end from the beginning. After being in Egyptian slavery for 210 years, Yahuah brings judgment upon Egypt. In his perfect timing, the promise Yahuah had given Abraham 430 years prior was coming to fruition. Moses is given instructions on how the Israelites and the sojourners should select a perfect lamb or goat on the 10th day of the first month. Yahuah had already identified the first day of the first month of the first year to Moses. In this study, we will see that this was not only the resetting of the start of the year. This, I see, was a start of a Jubilee cycle. As we journey through the campsites in the wilderness, this will become more and more apparent as we obtain multiple witnesses from Exodus, from Joshua, and from the book of Numbers. Understanding the Jubilee cycles has been, for the most part, lost, forgotten, or minimally addressed. But now Yahuah wants us to revisit this very important pattern because it affects our understanding of prophecy when he will usher in the ultimate Jubilee at the end of Daniel's 70th week, or the last 7 years. We know the Day of Atonement will be the final judgment day in the last 7 years of the prophetic 2,520-day timeline. Therefore, by reverse engineering the count by 7 years, we know that the beginning count should start the day after the Day of Atonement with the signing of the agreement with many. For this reason, the Abraham Accord Agreement signed September 2020 on the White House lawn may, I emphasize, may be that prophetic agreement. In Daniel 9:27, we read, "And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week." And I see that as the last 7 years. And in the middle of the week, which would equate to the 1,260th day, he shall put an end to slaughtering and meal offering, and on the wing of abominations he shall lay waste, even until the complete end. And that which is decreed is poured out on the one who lays waste, because he will only have 42 months. So based on Daniel 9:27, I see that we have very possibly entered that last 7 years of the last Jubilee cycle on earth as we know it. To be specific, on my count today, January 15th, 2022, equates to the 490th day count on the prophetic 360-day counting calendar. So let's look at some patterns thus far. This calendar, if you were to make a 360-day calendar, this is how it would look. Because you see, this month you start on the first day of the week and you go forward. And then on your second month, you pick up these blank squares and you fill in here, and you keep on doing so, just like you would make a similar calendar. And then what you notice is when you get to the 8th month, it repeats the first month. So then you continue to use those set months to complete a year. Now, when you start the second year, because this is year one, when you start the second year on a 360-day prophetic counting calendar, then the next year would start here on a Wednesday. So that's just an overall of what you're looking at for 1 year of a 360-day prophetic counting calendar. Now, these years, if you make 7 years of these, then they too start repeating on the 8th year. And those make up a Jubilee calendar. So based on set Jubilee cycles, Passover would uniquely fall on a Sabbath for the Exodus out of Egypt. Here is the example of the first year of the 360-day prophetic Jubilee calendar. This is what it would look like. The first year on a Jubilee cycle shows the Passover falling on a Sabbath right here. This is the same unique timing of the Passover observed by Joshua after Israel crossed the Jordan. But I plan on showing why I do not believe that that was a Jubilee when Joshua and the Israelites crossed the Jordan. At the same time, the children of Israel were instructed to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which in that year coincided with the wave sheaf on the 15th day, right here, and initiated the counting of the Omer leading to Pentecost. They would count 7 weeks of 7 completed Sabbaths. The 15th also was the day that the Israelites left Egypt, and that's recorded in Numbers chapter 33, verse 3. One of the key elements to seeing that when Joshua led the people over the Jordan not being a Jubilee is that we have to think of the Battle of Jericho and the conquering of the nations depicting our 7-year tribulation in our day. The Jubilee doesn't come until the end of the tribulation and the entry of our inheritance, and our inheritance will be with him forevermore. There are limited resources of those that truly have done serious study of the Jubilee cycle. Larry Wilson was one of those individuals, and he too used this same first monthly pattern on the first year of the Jubilee calendar with the Israelites' exodus out of Egypt. Shauna Manfredine also sees the exodus out of Egypt as the beginning of a Jubilee cycle. So my goal is simply this. This is all my goal is to encourage others to be good Bereans in regards to understanding the prophetic Jubilee cycles. I'm not saying I have this all figured out, but I'm saying I'm finding more validation in his word to be considered. And also I'm seeing the importance of us understanding the Jubilee cycles. Note, 360-day prophetic yearly counting calendars are made up of 7 set months that repeat. And that's what I just showed you here. There's only 7 patterns of months. And then when you reach the 8th month, it starts over with the first month pattern. These set months in turn can be built into 7 set years that repeat themselves as well. Now, this is all prophetic, okay? And these are all based on a 360-day year calendar and a 30-day month. So a closer look at the first month, and just envision this as the month with the Exodus out of Egypt. And these are the first 3 months for a closer look of the first year of the Jubilee cycle. You would have the Passover, and then following that, you'd have the week of unleavened bread, and that would run from the 15th to the 21st. And on this particular calendar, what's so unique about it is that it is the exact monthly pattern that Joshua observed. However, as stated before, Joshua's, however, was not a Jubilee. So you would also start in this unique month pattern. The counting of the Omer would also start this week, starting with the 15th. So you would have 1 week, 2 weeks, and then I carried these over to 3 weeks, 4, 5, 6, 7, which includes these. And then the 4th of the 3rd month would be the day of Pentecost. So in Exodus 12:2, we read, "This new month is the beginning of new months for you. It is the first new month of the year for you." So I had shared last week as well, what first new month of the year? Was it just a regular year, or is this also the first year of a Jubilee cycle? And this was a prophetic calendar reset. They would no longer be adhering to an Egyptian calendar. Remember, prior to Yahuah calling Moses, he had dwelt in Midian tending sheep for 40 years, and Moses was now 80 years old. Now, if the days during the Exodus out of Egypt had more than 360 days, then they would have also had a calendar to include those balancing days. So Moses was now 80 years old, and Joshua was 40 years old when they went in to spy out the land with Caleb and the 10 other spies. So I just wanted to give you that time frame of their ages. In Exodus 12:18, we read, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the new month in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the new month in the evening." So unleavened bread was eaten on Passover, and it extended into the week of unleavened bread. Though there were calendar adjustments needed between a 360 versus a 365.25 day year, Yahuah's prophetic timeline calendars and Jubilee cycles based on a 360-day year. Prophetic calendars serve as markers in time when recorded in his word. These markers can reckon or be used to cross-check and assist annual biblical calendars, which do include balancing days. Prophetic timelines and Jubilee cycles enhance annual calendars, but are not synonymous with them. And as I proceed, I just want to state that all of these discussions will be based on the day beginning at dawn. Today, we find multiple witnesses that reveal that the Exodus out of Egypt was the first year of a Jubilee cycle. Remember, the first year of a 49-year Jubilee cycle is a dual placeholder. That's a D-U-A-L, a dual placeholder, signifying the 50th year of a Jubilee and the first year of the next Jubilee count. At the same time, the children of Israel were instructed to observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which in that year coincided with the wave sheaf and the counting of the Omer, leading to Pentecost. They would count 7 weeks of 7 completed Sabbaths. It was the same pattern that Joshua would observe after crossing the Jordan, but his calendar fell in the first year of the last 7 years prior to the Jubilee, We will show the diagrams shortly. So in Leviticus 23, verse 15 and 16, and from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, sometimes referred to as first fruit offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Sabbaths. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you count 50 days. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yahuah. So let's take a look at that pattern. And so this is going to teach people that are new to understanding how to count the Omer. This will be a good exercise. So this is the focus of this particular screen, counting of the Omer. And you see, I have the days of the week above the top. And of course, I have Passover here falling on a Sabbath to reflect what we just reviewed. And I see that pattern as the pattern that was in place when Moses was led out of Egypt. Now, to your left, you're going to see week 1 of 7 days, week 2 of 7 days, and so forth until you get to week 7 of 7 days, and 7 times 7 equals 49. Now, this column over here under the Sabbath will reflect all the Sabbaths. On a Jubilee calendar, this last column reflects the sabbatical year when they would give the land rest. We see how the wave sheath always begins on a Sunday, and Pentecost always ends on a Sunday. And we know that based here, it says, and from the morrow after the Sabbath. So in this particular pattern, the morrow after the Sabbath begins on Sunday. And it will always begin on Sunday. From that day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourself 7 completed Sabbaths. Okay, so let's count 7 completed Sabbaths. So we just need to start counting daily. And so we go through it, and there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, and there's 7. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, which was this one, until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you count to 50 days. So here we go. And there's your 50th day, meaning it was the day of Pentecost. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yahuah. So you count 49 days, but the 50th goes back and lands on a Sunday. There's no extra day out here added. The week simply goes back to Sunday. Therefore, the 50th day of Pentecost falls on the first day of the next week. It too is a dual placeholder for the 50th and the first day of a new week. So the Omer count starts on a Sunday and ends on a Sunday. Now let's take a look at the time following Yahushua's crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection. And we know his resurrection occurred on a Sabbath as it dawned into the first day of the week, Sunday. And again, this presentation is based on the day beginning at dawn. And so how do we know that? Because so many of us were taught that he was resurrected on Sunday. But if you read here in John 20, verse 1, it says on day 1 of the week. Well, right there, that's very confusing. Why? Because day is in italics. So that was not in the original text. And it should read, and on 1 of the week. And then that's footnoted with an A. So let's go down here and look at that, what that means. Oh, it means 1 of the Sabbaths. Oh, okay. On 1 of the Sabbaths, Mary from Magdala came early to the tomb while it was still dark. It had not dawned into the first day of the week, and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. Okay, so based on that, we can know that based on the day starting at dawn, Yahushua resurrected on a Sabbath as it was dawning into the first day of the week, which we refer to many times as Sunday. We see another pattern within the counting of the Omer that occurred during the time after Yahushua's death, burial, and resurrection, when Yahushua was seen for 40 days before being taken up in Acts chapter 1. So let's go and we count. We're counting the Omer just like we did last time. Same thing, counting of the Omer. But then it's something very unique in this counting of the Omer, the 40th day. That was unique. So we see another pattern within the counting of the Omer that occurred during the time after Yahushua's death, burial, and resurrection, when Yahushua was seen for 40 days before being taken up in Acts chapter 1. He told his disciples to tarry in Jerusalem until he would send the Comforter, the Holy Spirit. So let's read about that account down here in Acts chapter 1. Until the day when he was taken up, after giving instructions through the set-apart Spirit to the emissaries whom he had chosen, to whom he also presented himself alive after his suffering by many infallible proofs, being seen by them for 40 days, speaking concerning the reign of Elohim. And meeting with them, he commanded them not to leave Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father, which you have heard from me. Because John truly immersed in water, but you shall be immersed in the set-apart Spirit not many days from now. So not many days from now would equate to 10 days, because 40 plus 10 equals 50. So they tarried 10 days to Pentecost, and the Comforter was sent that day. So in this example, the significant numbers to make note of are the number 40, the number 10, because they would tarry for 10 days, and the number 50. So what does this have to do with our Torah portions and the Exodus out of Egypt and the end of days? Well, that's what we're going to look at as we continue. The year of Jubilee is defined in Leviticus 25, verse 8. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. Very similar. It's actually just a bigger picture of the Omer count. You shall then sound a shofar sound on the 10th day of the 7th new month on Yom Kippur, cause a shofar to sound through all the land. And you shall set the 50th year apart, and proclaim release throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It is a yovel for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you return to his clan. The 50th year is a yovel, a jubilee to you. Do not sow nor reap what grows of its own, nor gather from its unpruned vine. It is a yovel. It is set apart to you. Eat from the field its crops. In the year of this jubilee, let each one of you return to his possession. Now we need to shift from days, as we saw in the Omer count, to years, as we see when we count the Jubilee cycles. Actually, no big deal. It is the same pattern. And this is going to help us understand how to count Jubilees. So the Omer day count to 50 is a micro view of the macro yearly count of the Jubilee cycle. But wait, Libby, doesn't a Jubilee begin on Yom Kippur? Glad you asked that question. Yes, it does. Upon the sounding of the trumpet on Yom Kippur, which is on the 10th day of the 7th month, which we could easily equate to Yahuah's voice announcing to Pharaoh, let my people go. He announced that throughout all the land. Is also a day of judgment. Is it not? Yes, indeed. Yom Kippur is a day of judgment. We have studied that Yahuah brought 10 plagues upon Egypt. And we know in the book of Revelation, more plagues will be coming in the last 7 years before his return and his final judgment day. But we can only speculate as to the time frame that those 10 plagues covered during the time of Moses. We know that it was definitely more than 10 days because the plague of darkness in itself lasted 3 days. So from the blowing of the trumpet on Yom Kippur, the people knew that the following year was to be a year of Jubilee. Yahuah identified the start of the year to Moses in Exodus 12:2. And so before he identified the start of the year, well, we remember that Yahuah met with Moses at the burning bush. Of course, there probably was not a formal Yom Kippur blowing of the shofar that previous year, but it could very easily equate to Yahuah announcing throughout all the land through Moses and Aaron to let my people go. So it is my understanding that the 5 months and 20 days on a 360-day counting calendar between Yom Kippur and the first of the year, that time period allowed people to be released and returned to their possessions. Then on the first day of the first month of the first year, then the Jubilee would go into effect. So it would be announced on Yom Kippur. It would go into effect on the first day of the first month of the first year. Now that's how I understand it. This judgment pattern has a supporting witness by us seeing the 10 times Pharaoh hardened his heart. Judgment comes before Jubilee. It is also interesting that Pharaoh, the Egyptian people and livestock lost their firstborn on Passover. Several thousand years later, we would see Yahusha lay down his life on Passover for us. Yahusha was Yahuah's firstborn, and we, as Israel born from above, are his firstborn. So let's look at this in more detail. So again, we have the scriptures to your left that we just read about the year of Jubilee. And here is that excerpt I have shared before from Shauna Manfredine's book called To Canaan by Danette Davis and Shauna Manfredine. The highlighted areas is what I will focus on. Because the question is, well, if the Jubilee is a time that people return to their inheritance and clan, well, Libby, when did that happen under Moses's time period during the Exodus? We read, the newly identified Israel traveled to Sukkot with their livestock and children, leaving their former homes and farms in the land of Ramesses of Goshen. So they were released. They were released from slavery, and they left those former homes in which they lived in while in slavery, and they left those farmlands. And so we see that here in verse 10 of Leviticus, it says, and you shall set the 50th year apart and proclaim release throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. And we know all the Israelites were led out of Egypt. We even know sojourners that obeyed the covenant commands also left. It was a mixed multitude. They were released. And they left their former homes and their farmlands. And verse 10 says, this is a Yovel, this is a Jubilee for you. And each of you shall return to his possession. Each of you return to his clan. Oh, they return to their clan. Well, when does that happen when you leave out of Exodus, when Moses led them out of Egypt? Sukkot, their first campsite, was a military base on the eastern border of Egypt, large enough for this great number of people and flocks to assemble and organize into ranks or tribes, because that's what they did. They gathered like with the tribe of Judah would be gathered, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Ephraim, the tribe of Dan. They all found their clan, they all found their tribe, and they were organized by tribe. And of course, later on in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, we'll see them encamped around the dwelling place in a very orderly fashion. And again, it's validated where she writes, Moses quickly organized the children of Israel, and they did not leave empty-handed. The Israelites were released from their bondage of slavery. They were led out of Egypt and rejoined to their tribes. They were moved from effect state that we studied in the One New Man series to cause state. They shifted from defensive to offensive, from slave mentality to warrior, and they didn't leave empty-handed. Another excerpt from the books called To Canaan. This is from volume 3. Now, listen up here. Additionally, Israel most likely left Egypt in the Jubilee year. The evidence for this is the fact that Jubilee is the appointed time given by Yahuah for setting the captives free. The Exodus experience certainly fits the Jubilee pattern. Also, the children of Israel were told to count the next year as their first. Exodus 12, verse 2. This strongly supports the belief that the Exodus took place on a Jubilee year. Notably then, on the next Jubilee, Israel entered Jerusalem, called Salem, first built by Shem, the grandson of Noah. Now, we recall in Genesis 14, the Battle of the Kings, when Melchizedek came out to meet Abraham in Genesis 14. He was king of Salem and priest to the Most High Elohim. Now, we also know from the book of Yasher that Melchizedek is identified as Shem. Now, there's differences of opinion there, but that's pretty solid. So it's interesting when she wrote, notably then, on the next Jubilee, Israel entered Jerusalem called Salem, first built by Shem, the grandson of Noah. So that's extremely interesting that during that time period, after they had crossed the Jordan, after they had conquered Jericho, after they eventually conquered Ai, after they go on to conquer southern Canaan, northern Canaan, and all of those, the next Jubilee from the Exodus out of Egypt would have been when they entered Jerusalem, and that was also during the time of Joshua. So this foreshadows ultimate Israel's entrance into the New Jerusalem. Ultimately, the 42nd encampment of Israel is a prophetic sealing message. This was clear in the Father's revelation of his sealing name. Once we have, by his grace, passed the 42 lessons and tests of Israel in the wilderness, we can be sealed in our Father's name. In the end, our experience at this encampment will be culminated in the sealing. We are either his, we are either part of the one new man, Israel born from above, or others may be part of the beast man rising system. There's only two choices. So how can we validate what is written in this volume 3 of Call to Canaan? I pulled some key verses out of Joshua that validate the Jubilee cycles. In Joshua 1:15, it says, until Yahuah has given your brothers rest as unto you, so shall they also take possession of the land which Yahuah your Elohim is giving them. Then you shall return to the land of your possession and shall possess that which Moses, the servant of Yahuah, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the rising of the sun. And Joshua 2 verse 1. This is talking about the two witnesses. Now, this is very important because in the end of days, we will have the two witnesses testify, because Yahuah does nothing without two witnesses. And we know that the two witnesses will probably be, or possibly be, the spirit of Elijah and the spirit of Moses, plus the two lampstands that are possibly the Assembly of Philadelphia and the Assembly of Smyrna. And the two witnesses must witness before a Jubilee. And Joshua, son of Nun. Now, Nun uniquely has a numeric Hebrew value of 50. And Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent out 2 men from Shittim to spy, saying, go see the land and Jericho. And they went and came to the house of a woman, a whore, and her name was Rahab, and they lay down there. Okay. Joshua 2 verse 12 through 13. And now, please swear to me by Yahuah, since I have shown you loving commitment, and this is speaking of Rahab, that you also show loving commitment to my father's house, and shall give me a true token, and shall spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters, and all that they have, and shall deliver our lives from death. And isn't that the same picture that will happen in the 3.5 years when the two witnesses testify to possibly the lukewarm believers or the non-believers? They will have recognized and want to receive Yahuah and be remembered and be shown mercy and saving grace. That is what I see Rahab representing for us in the last 7 years. Joshua 2:16, and she said to them, go to the mountain, lest the pursuers come upon you, and you shall hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned, and afterwards go on your way. So the witnesses go to the mountain times 3 days and give their witnessing report to Joshua when they return. In verse 23 and 24, then the two men returned and came down from the mountain and passed over. And they came to Joshua, son of Nun, and related to him all that had befallen them. And they said to Joshua, truly, Yahuah has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land have melted away because of us. Some continued verses from Joshua and Numbers. We see Israel crosses the Jordan from Shittim. That was the 42nd campsite and the final campsite before they crossed the Jordan. Joshua 3 verse 1. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and stayed there before they passed over. And it came to be after 3 days that the officers went into the midst of the camp. Now you have to understand, we're talking probably 2.5 to 3 million people that were stretched all along from Shittim further down along the Jordan. And this is saying that after 3 days that the officers went into the midst of the camp, because they didn't have cell phones. They had to go and make these instructions and announcements made known to all this multitude of people. So that's what's happening after those 3 days. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahuah, your Elohim, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. So they all had to be on the same page. And then in Numbers 33, 49 through 54, and they camped by the Jordan from Beth Yeshimoth as far as the Abel Shittim in the desert plains of Moab. And Yahuah spoke to Moses in the desert plains of Moab by the Jordan of Jericho, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you have passed over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and shall destroy all their engraved stones, and shall destroy all their molded images, and lay waste all their high places, and you shall possess the land and dwell in it, for I have given you the land to possess. And you shall divide the land by lot as an inheritance among your clans. To the larger, you give a larger inheritance, and to the smaller, you give a smaller inheritance. Wherever the lot falls to anyone, that is his. You inherit according to the tribes of your father. So again, the highlighted emphasis. Israel most likely left Egypt in the Jubilee year. Jubilee is the appointed time given by Yahuah for setting the captives free. Notably then, on the next Jubilee, Israel entered Jerusalem, called Salem, first built by Shem. So those are things to be mindful of. Also from volume 3, further emphasizing this final separation of the chaff from the wheat are the Hebrew names given in Numbers 33. The multitude stretched out along the river between Beth Jezimoth at one end and Abel Shittim at the other extreme. So here you have a map to your bottom right-hand corner. So this is Beth Jezimoth, and this is Abel Shittim. So all of these millions of people stretched out along the Jordan. Significantly, Beth Jezimoth means house of desolation or ruin, whereas Abel Shittim means meadow of acacia. Acacia is the wood used in the sanctuary furniture. It represents the character of those who serve him in his house. The two extremes denote an ultimate pass or fail, and that's going to be for us too, especially during the time of the 7-year tribulation, especially when we reach that midpoint after the first 1,260 days. When people have to make that final decision, do they choose the spotless lamb of Elohim, or do they choose the counterfeit, the wolf in sheep's clothing? It's a pass or fail. There's no in between. It will be the seal of Elohim versus the mark of the beast. Those anticipating the crossing of Jordan were so judged. Only those who recognize their calling to descend will be promoted to rise as kings and priests in the service of their holy land. So this is just simply picturing all those people from Abel Shittim all the way down to Beth Jezimoth. Joshua 9. In Joshua 9, that was when the Israelites were deceived by some local Gibeonites. They disguise themselves and they make a covenant of peace with Israel, and Israel has to honor that covenant, so they become their servants. And in Joshua 10:42, that's when the conquest of southern Canaan takes place. And Joshua captured all those kings, and there was like 5 kings that came after him and their land at one time, because Yahuah Elohim of Israel fought for Israel. And Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. And then the conquest of northern Canaan takes place in Joshua 11. Thus, Joshua took the entire land according to all that Yahuah had said to Moses, and Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from fighting. So how many years did all of that take? In Bible Hub, there's a timeline for Joshua. So the question is, what type of time frame are we looking at from the time that Joshua and the Israelites crossed the Jordan? Well, in this Bible timeline of Joshua in Bible Hub, we see 1406 BC, Yahuah commissions Joshua. And then it continues the timeline down to 1399 BC, when the land was allotted among the tribes. And that was taking place in Joshua 13 through 22. So that's 7 years. So keep that in mind, because soon we are going to look at the overview of that Jubilee calendar. Okay, now this is a sample of the Exodus Jubilee as I understand it, okay? And a year on a Jubilee cycle parallels to a day. Therefore, after the 40th year, there are 10 days or years left before the actual Jubilee. And that's pretty interesting because, of course, Yahusha was taken up on the 40th day of that counting of the Omer before he sent the Comforter. So we're looking at patterns. We're looking at patterns. And on a Jubilee calendar, it too has like a Sunday year column, a Monday year column, if you will, a Tuesday year column, a Wednesday year column, and so forth, and then a Sabbath year column, which are the years of sabbatical land rest. So over here, this row is year 1 of 7s, not week of days, but year, the 7 years. This is the first row. And then this would be the second, and so forth and so on. So just like we counted the Omer, we count the years of Jubilee. And then the 7th year there in a new Jubilee cycle, that would be the year of sabbatical rest. And then we just keep on counting. And then each 7th year is a sabbatical land rest. And then the 40th year they reached in the wilderness before they will proceed to the next Jubilee. So the last 7 years were spent conquering the nations, as I shared, first Jericho, then the rest of the nations that we just reviewed in Joshua and Numbers, and when they returned and got their possessions per clan, they were all assigned their lots to take possession. And again, over here on the left, we're no longer looking at days, we're looking now at years. So as I understand it, when they crossed the Jordan and would eventually fight the Battle of Jericho, that would have been in this year, the 43rd year of the Jubilee cycle. Let me just back it up one. Now, this calendar, and these aren't just little placeholders you see. I actually made the year behind each one of these numbers. They have specific patterns to each column, but there's only 7 set years in a 360-day counting prophetic calendar. That's why all of this row's 1-year calendars are the same. All of this row's 2nd-year calendars are the same. All of this row 3rd-year calendars are the same. And because there's only 7 patterns of years. So this 43rd year of the Jubilee cycle would have the same Passover pattern as Moses did in the 1st year leading out of Egypt. They're both identical, except Moses's year was a year of Jubilee. Joshua's Jubilee would not happen until they crossed over, they observed Passover, they were circumcised and they observed Passover, and then they would start conquering Jericho, they would conquer Ai, they would go on, like I shared, conquered southern Canaan, northern Canaan, and eventually enter into Salem. And Salem was founded, that city was founded by Shem, which I earlier connected to Melchizedek, when the Melchizedek came out to meet Abraham after the Battle of the Kings. And the Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest to the Most High Elohim. So that would take as I also showed through Bible Hub's timeline, 7 years before they could claim possession of their land, and the land was divided into lots. So I just wanted to get people grounded on what this Jubilee calendar looks like. And it consists of 49 years, and then the 50th starts on a Sunday year, just as the Jubilee starts on a Sunday year. And this Jubilee is a dual placeholder. It's the 50th year, but it's also the first year of the next Jubilee cycle. For us, the Grand Jubilee, we will spend our next Jubilee with the King of Kings. So the last 7 years that I have highlighted here were spent conquering the nations, first Jericho, then the rest. Now, I hope that makes it clear. So we have this 40 years, but I'm going to talk more about that. But it's interesting. I want you to note, because some of the numbers I've been emphasizing are the number 40, the number 10, like 40 plus 10 equals 50. And of course, 49. So they crossed the Jordan and they conquered Jericho. And again, that's just the conquering of Jericho is also a pattern of the last 7 years as well. There's so much we could dig into. So just as in the last 7 years, the two witnesses must precede before Yahuah passes judgment. This was the same during the time of Joshua. Joshua 2 verse 1, and Joshua son of Nun secretly sent out 2 men from Shittim to spy, saying, go see the land and Jericho. And they went and came to the house of a woman, a whore, and her name was Rahab, and they lay down there. So the two houses, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, were both identified in the past biblical accounts as whoring against Yahuah. And so in the last 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation, when they eventually have eyes that see and ears that hear, the two witnesses will witness to them so that they can receive grace by faith and receive Yahushua HaMashiach and be saved. So that's the comparison to the last 7 years that we should see. And as I also identified that none equates to the numerical value of 50, which is also unique. Now, in Joshua 3 verse 1, it says, and Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out for Shittim and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and stayed there before they passed over. And it came to be after 3 days that the officers went into the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahuah, your Elohim, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and follow it. So they passed on the information for 3 days. Now, could that correlate to their encampment at the last site in preparation of all that number of people to cross the Jordan? Possibly. But another thing we have to consider is that in Acts 13:18, Paul said, and about 40 years time, he bore with them in the wilderness. And the majority of these particular translations also say a time of about 40 years. And then there's a few that do not, but I did want to bring that to our attention for consideration as we learn and learn together. So Joshua chapter 11, 23, and I've color coded these to kind of match the green with the green and the salmon colored orange with the orange at the bottom. Thus, Joshua took the entire land. Leviticus 25:10, it says, and you shall set the 50th year apart and proclaim release throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. And Joshua gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their divisions by their tribes, and the land rested from fighting. Proclaim release throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It is a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you return to his clan. So I see that matching up and being identified as a jubilee. And over here is just a map of what that may have looked like as the land was allotted to all the tribes. Now, we know that 2.5 tribes stayed on the east side of the Jordan. That would have been Gad, Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh. The other half was on the west side. In Joshua 4, in regarding the 10th day, and the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. So they were camped east of Jericho, but they were west of the Jordan, but they were east of Jericho. And so we know that the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. So they came up on this day, the 10th day of the first month. That's when the lamb, spotless lamb or spotless goat, was selected. And so therefore we have the same pattern shown as Moses possibly followed here, the same pattern. And this is the first 3 months of that first column in a Jubilee calendar. So they would be observing this Passover in that same column year in the 43rd year of the Jubilee cycle. Only in the first column does the Jubilee calendar match Joshua's Passover occurring on a Shabbat. This was the same for the Jubilee Exodus out of Egypt, as far as I can determine. This is why seeing the set 7-year patterns of Jubilee calendar years is important. Now, this is an example I've used in the past, and I want to explain more about the importance of a Jubilee cycle as we study scripture throughout his word, but especially in the book of Ezekiel. Because if you understand Jubilee cycles, that's going to help us decipher the dating methods in the book of Ezekiel. So what do I mean by a Jubilee calendar serving as a reckoning or cross-check for annual calendars, annual biblical calendars? The Jubilee cycle calendars help us know what year is being spoken of in a Jubilee cycle recorded in scriptures. This helps us decipher those dating methods, especially in the book of Ezekiel. In essence, Jubilee calendars serve as a common anchor for annual biblical calendars, which do include balancing days. Remember, all annual biblical calendars have 360 days nestled within them. Understanding Jubilee calendars unlocked several puzzling date stamps for me recorded in the book of Ezekiel. I've been in long discussions simply over the first verse in Ezekiel. Then when I saw the beauty of the Jubilee calendar, the recorded date stamp made perfect sense. Before, however, the date stamps seemed disconnected, but after understanding the Jubilee cycle dating method, it flowed perfectly. Here is one of my first eye-opening benefits of understanding Jubilee calendars. So here is a 49-year Jubilee cycle. And of course, this 50th year would have been on the next screen in this first column. So Jubilee cycle is actually 49 years, and the 50th year starts the next Jubilee cycle, but it has a dual placeholder. It is also the 50th year and also the first year of the next cycle. And here you can see more distinctly the specific calendars in each column. They are set calendars, and when you reach the 7th year, they simply start repeating. So you just keep on going, so forth. But this was the verse I was speaking of. And it came to be in the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th of the new month, as I was among the exiles by the river Kabar, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of Elohim. Well, what does that mean? I mean, so many people have discussed, well, what does the 30th year in the 4th month on the 5th of the new month mean? Was that connected to a king ruling? Was that connected to the exile? What is that connected to? That was usually the question of the discussions I've had in the past. And it goes on to say, on the 5th of the new month, in the 5th year of sovereign Jehoiakim's exile. Well, now it's getting more specific. The word of Yahuah came expressly to Ezekiel, the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Kasdim by the river Kabar, and the hand of Yahuah came upon me here. So having a Jubilee cycle calendar, let's evaluate that first verse. And I've highlighted the 30th year of the Jubilee cycle here. And it came to be in the 30th year, in the 4th month. Okay, so let's highlight the 4th month. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we got that. Now I'm going to enlarge this particular calendar. All right, so it's the 30th year. This is the 30th year. We've highlighted the 4th month on the 5th of the new month. Okay, we have that identified. As I was among the exiles by the river Kabar, the heavens were open and I saw visions of Elohim. On the 5th of the new month, in the 5th year of sovereign Jehoiakim's exile. So this is the 5th year of Jehoiakim's exile. So there's no conflict in the dating. So that's just one example of how the dating method of Jubilees is incorporated in Scripture, especially in Ezekiel. So now let's bring it home. How does this affect us today? Well, let's do what the Jubilee cycle would look like for us and Daniel's 70th week. Because the last 7 years of tribulation equate to the last year of a Jubilee cycle, whether it's continuous all the way to our time frame or whether there was a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week. Of course, I do see that being a gap. Others may just view this as the last 7 years. So here again, if we just count those years, this row here, excuse me, would be the 69th week, and this would be the 70th final week, but you would have to envision a gap there. And that's discussed in another series in Daniel. So what was interesting, was that our 2021 Passover matched the Passover seen with Joshua in the first year in the last week of years prior to Jubilee. So what I'm saying here, these last 7 years leading to the ultimate Jubilee can only be speculative at this point. But one thing we've noticed in our past studies, we have identified the year 2018 as the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. And also it was the 40th anniversary of the Education Day resolution that became U.S. public law that included the Noahide laws in 1991. But the resolutions were signed in 1978. And we're going to see that the Revelation 12 sign appeared in September, I believe it was September 23rd, 2017. So we have on the particular counting calendar that I initiated from the signing of the Abraham Accord, and I overlaid it on the prophetic 360-day counting calendar, would fall right here. And this would coincide with the same year as Joshua. So I have 2021 because that's when the signing took place in the fall, and we started our count the day after Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. So that's why I have it split years, 2020, then 21. And then we continued on 21, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26, 27, 28. And as I see it, 2028 may very well be the Jubilee in heaven when Yahushua returns for us. Now, of course, this is all speculative, but in my count so far, as I shared, thus this day is the 490th day of the 2,520-day count. I haven't had any reason to make myself stop counting. Nothing has told me I'm off track yet. When I do see that, I most certainly will stop. I'm not trying to mislead anyone. I'm just trying to be a watchman on the wall and have us ponder these possibilities. So the 10 days of years based on that 40th anniversary would lead us to the 2028 as possible epic Jubilee. And that was the count, as I already shared. Now, 2017, September 23rd of 2017 was when we all heard the talk about the sign in the heaven with the woman clothed with the sun and the moon at her feet. And that was cited on September 23rd, 2017. So again, I've split the years there, 2017, 2018. Now, this 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution and the Education Day resolution, that was 2018, but they both have a placeholder here in the 40th year. And then if we went on to 2018, 19, and then 2019, 20, well, then it just rather flowed right into the start of the count that we initiated with the Abraham Accord. So it was interesting that our 2021 Passover last year matched, and that's on our annual covenant calendar. It was interesting that that Passover matched this pattern in this year on the Jubilee calendar. And it also matched with Joshua in year 7 of 7, the first year in the last week prior to the Jubilee. This pattern showed up not only in our covenant calendar, but also, as I've shared, I've gleaned several insights from Nick Vanderlaan. He follows his Enoch solar calendar, and he doesn't believe in all the Enoch calendars. This is something he's researched, and he is one of the few that is well versed with the Jubilee cycles. And he also does a dawn day start. So this may add more significance to the year 2021 as being the first year in the year 7 of sevens. So I thought that was extremely interesting. This leads us into the campsite journeys in the wilderness and recounting Israel's journey out of Egypt. These are the departures of the children of Israel who went out of the land of Egypt by their divisions under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote down the starting points of their departures at the mouth of Yahuah. And these are their departures according to their starting points. So they departed from Ramesses in the first new month on the 15th day of the first new month. On the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with boldness before the eyes of all the Egyptians. And they went out in military marching formation. They went out with boldness and confidence of who they were and to whom they belonged. And that is cross-referenced in Exodus 12 that we read last week. And it came to be at mid of night, because midnight is a modern term. And it came to be at mid of night that Yahuah struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Mitzrites, Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not a dead one. Numbers 33:4. And the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn whom Yahuah had stricken among them. Also on their mighty ones, Yahuah had executed judgments. Then the children of Israel departed from Ramesses and camped at Sukkot. And that coincides with Exodus 12:37. And the children of Israel set out from Ramesses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot. That's only counting the men. There were probably 2.5 to 3 million people, plus all their livestock, besides the little ones, it says in that verse. So campsite 1 was Sukkot, and the sukkah calls upon its occupants to shed their physical limitations, look beyond shortcomings, and achieve their full potential. This can only happen through a relationship with the Messiah, the deliverer from Egypt. The newly identified Israel traveled to Sukkot with their livestock and children, leaving their former homes and farms in the land of Ramesses of Goshen. About 25 miles from Ramesses, Sukkot was the place where the sons of Israel paused to retrieve the bones of Joseph from his tomb at Karnak. And again, that's a type and picture, a shadow picture of the Ezekiel's dry bones coming together as the one new man. And, you know, remember, they were gathered into their clans, kind of gathered into their sukkahs by clan at the first campsite, Sukkot. Sukkot means temporary dwellings and the point of transition between darkness and light. It is a calling for us to acknowledge that this world is not our home. It is a dividing point where to progress, we must leave spiritual darkness behind and enter Yahuah's marvelous light. When we decide to leave spiritual Egypt and journey to Canaan, we enter the covenant between true Israel, born from above, and Yahuah. For those of the covenant, Yahuah offers a sevenfold promise, because he told the Israelites then, and he tells us now, he will bring us out of darkness. He will free us from the soul ties of bondage. He will lead us into his redemption by his outstretched arm. He will take us to be his people, and he will be our personal Elohim. He will guide us to the heavenly Canaan, and he will give us the new earth for our possession. And they departed from Sukkot and camped at Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. And in Exodus, it's recorded, and they departed from Sukkot and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. Etham was the second campsite, and it meant flee from them and plowshares. While Egypt represents the full darkness of bondage to sin, Babylon is a symbol of the pseudo-religion that mixes the sacred with the profane. Babylon is a symbol of the pseudo-religion that mixes the sacred with the profane. And that's why we have been emphasizing to the traditional church setting. We don't want to disregard our humble beginnings, but at the same time, the traditional church setting continues to blend the sacred with the profane. They celebrate Tammuz Christmas and Ishtar fertility goddess Easter, and this should not be. And he didn't cut them any slack during the time of the Exodus and the time in the wilderness for his people. And he's the same today, yesterday, and forever. So this is extremely important. You just can't slough it off. This is between you and the Elohim and creator of all the universe, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Elohim of our covenant, Yahuah HaMashiach. Our covenant was sealed with his precious blood. He died in our place, and we can't even observe his feast days, our wedding rehearsals, and we're going to go and play in the mud with the traditional pagan holidays? It makes no sense. In the message of Etham, final Israel is called out of both, but we mustn't just get out of Babylon or Egypt. We need the Father, this is important, to get Babylon and Egypt out of us. And that says it very well. And that's what I was trying to say with the traditional church setting, that we appreciate our humble beginnings, but they need to get Babylon out of the traditional church setting. It can be incremental, but they need to start making steps and repent of the past celebrations of such. In this station is the identity of the one leading them. Prior to Etham, the word for God is the Hebrew word Elohim, the creator in Genesis 1 and Exodus chapter 12, 17 through 18. At Etham, God more fully revealed himself as the great I am, who had met Moses at the foot of the mountain of instructions. There at Etham, he became to them Yahuah, the eternal Father. And they departed from Etham and turned back to Pi Ha-Haroth, which is east of Baal Zephon, and they camped near Migdal. And the same is shared in Exodus 14, verse 2 and verse 9. Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi Ha-Haroth, between Migdal and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon, camp before it by the sea. And the Egyptians pursued them, and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them camping by the sea, beside Pi Ha-Haroth, before Baal Zephon. That was not a fun time for the children of Israel. Pi Ha-Haroth means to subside, to calm, to be quiet in the face of wrath. Quite a challenge to be calm, to be quiet in the face of wrath. Like Israel at the Red Sea, the end time people of God will be faced with life-threatening crises and persecuting wrath. In such circumstances, we are to trust Yahuah enough to be still and await his intervention. The tikkun of this site is to be still and know that Yahuah is God. Even while the wicked king of the north bears down upon us, bringing imminent death, when the children of Israel turned their eyes in the direction of their deliverance, Migdal was in full view. Migdal, meaning tower, is a reminder to the last day saints that Yahuah's name is our strong tower. We are invited to run into it and be safe. And they departed from before Ha-hi-Haroth and passed over through the midst of the sea into the wilderness, went 3 days' journey into the wilderness of Etham, and camped at Marah. And Moses stretched out his hand in Exodus 14:21 over the sea. And Yahuah caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. We read more of the account in 22 through 31. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on the right and on the left. And the Mitzrites pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all the horses of Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to be in the morning watch that Yahuah looked down upon the army of the Mitzrites through the column of fire and cloud. So he was very much with them. And he brought the army of the Mitzrites into confusion, and he took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for Yahuah fights for them against the Mitzrites." Then Yahuah said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea and let the waters come back upon the Mitzrites, on their chariots and on their horsemen." And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its usual flow at the break of day, with the Egyptians fleeing into it. Thus Yahuah overthrew the Mitzrites in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the army of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them, and not even one was left of them. And the children of Israel walked on dry ground in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on the right and on the left. Thus Yahuah saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And Israel saw the great work which Yahuah had done in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. And the people feared Yahuah and believed Yahuah and his servant Moses. Chapter 15, 22 and 26. And Moses brought Israel from the Sea of Reeds, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And they came to Marah, and they were unable to drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. So the name of it was called Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then he cried out to Yahuah, and Yahuah showed him a tree. And when he threw it into the waters were made sweet. There he made a law and a right ruling for them, and there he tried them. And he said, "If you diligently obey the voice of Yahuah, your Elohim, and do what is right in his eyes, and shall listen to his commands, and shall guard all his laws, I shall bring on you none of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am Yahuah who heals you." So campsite 4 was Marah. At Marah, the children of Israel were tested with thirst. They did not bear the trial patiently, but complained and grew embittered. When faced with the bitter waters of Marah, the children of Israel doubted Yahuah's love and care for them. This was no small offense. And should we repeat it? Our sin would be even greater than theirs, as we have ancient Israel's example, and we should learn from their mistakes. Spiritual Israel in the last days will most assuredly face instances of physical deprivation. When we experience this Marah test, we must remain submitted to Yahweh, praying for deliverance, but patient in tribulation. Murmuring, bitterness, and complaint about our circumstances is really a lack of gratitude for and submission to Yahuah. He is our provider. When we complain about what we have been given, heaven views it as nothing short of rebellion against the King of Kings. The remedy for Marah's bitterness was the branch, representing the life-changing power of Yahushua. This shows us spiritually that the antidote for bitterness and a complaining spirit is the full infusion of the Savior's presence in our lives. Here, the promise was given that Yahuah would not only provide our daily physical needs, he will also give his children healing. Thus, we wait upon him to supply the promise. And they departed from Marah and came to Elim. And in Exodus, it goes on to say, as in Numbers, where there were 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the waters. Campsite 5 is Elim. Elim was the second recorded campsite after Israel crossed the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba. The name means ram, it means strong, it means stag, or terebinth trees. Some give the meaning of Elim as strength or Elohim strong angels. All agree, however, that Elim was the place of strengthening after the Marah trial. Israel's fifth campsite since Egypt, Elim's numeric order also lends depth to its significance. 5 is the number associated with the Spirit bringing a window of insight. Certainly, the children of Israel needed a major lesson in spiritual sight after their failure at Marah. Elim was a delightful place, which offered 12 springs of water and was graced with 70 palm trees. Remarkably, Elim was only a morning's jaunt from Marah, yet the bitterness of Marah was forgotten by the sweetness of Elim. Here they camped for about a month, regaining their strength. Next was a grouping of the camps, and they departed from Elim and camped by the Sea of Reeds. Campsite 6, Sea of Reeds. Bogged in confusion, Yamsuf, and they removed from Elim and encamped by the Red Sea, or Reed Sea, in modern Bible translations. Leaving Elim, the scenery changed. Instead of sandy plains, the nomad nation would have entered the mountains with its lush carpets of early spring grasses, in striking contrast to the red sandstone of the rocks dotting the land. They followed the coastline that next day and camped by a marshy area. The Bible leaves out this sixth camping location from the Exodus account in chapters 15 and 16, but listed in the summary of campsites found in Numbers 33. Therefore, it is included here, for there is something to learn from the marshes. And this is the whole purpose behind the 3-book series of Call to Canaan, because we too will have these similar experiences reflected in the campsites. In verse 11 of 33, it says, and they departed from the Sea of Reeds and camped in the wilderness of Sin. And they set out from Elim in Exodus 16:1, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second new month after their going out of the land of Egypt. The wilderness of Sin. Sin is one of the names of the pre-Islamic moon god. He was worshipped widely throughout Midian. The wilderness of Sin was named after him and was largely peopled by worshipers of this false deity. The children of Israel often failed by mixing moon worship practices into their worship of Yahuah. This is still happening in the days and ways many professed Sabbath keepers use for worship. One of the main tests in this 7th campsite is the battle of the belly, the choice of how and what to eat is still a source of idolatry in Christianity today. Those who enter ultimate Canaan will have learned to be submitted and obedient in how they eat. Yahuah's end-time saints will also praise and trust him equally in times of plenty or periods of deprivation. The lack of bread in the end times will not only be a physical one, the spiritual lack of bread is far more serious. Those who are not daily eating of the word or the manna will be spiritually starving and without strength in the coming test. You know, the joy in the Lord is our strength. The children of Israel failed this lesson. Instead of praise, prayers, and trust, they rendered complaints unto Elohim. In so doing, they entered the age-old and often repeated cycle of apostasy. In the last days, we are to take warning in this and not fall into apostasy ourselves. And we're already seeing apostasy take place. The manna, which the Father sent to Israel at this campsite, was not only the antidote to their physical hunger, it is spiritually the prevention and cure for the disease of unsubmitted grumbling. Manna, a symbol of the living bread of the word, gives us the strength to keep from sinning against Elohim. Final Israel will be prepared and enabled to have victory over the battle of the belly and will be spiritually fed with the richness of the word by surrendering to Yahuah's will daily and eating of the living manna, the word. And they departed from the wilderness of sin and camped at Dopka. Dopka is the 8th campsite, means knocking, and spiritually represents the final call to end time Laodicea, also known as the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Dopka was a region of slave mines where the Egyptians sent their political prisoners. Many Hebrews were enslaved in these copper mines, representing the lost sheep of the house of Israel, enslaved in spiritual darkness. Yahuah's people who have been set free and have themselves tasted of the water of life are commissioned to help free these slaves of darkness. All who are saved from the darkness and enslavement of sin immediately become soul winners. In the last days, the experience of Dopka will be a series of 3 biblical knocks. 1, the Savior knocks, offering the opportunity for life and deliverance. Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. 2, those who accept this deliverance seek for further blessings in knocking on heaven's storehouse in prayer. Matthew 7, verse 7 and 8. Number 3, those who reject the last call to lost sheep, believing themselves spiritually fine, will knock on the door of grace too late. Matthew chapter 25, verse 10 through 12. Thus, the ultimate message of Dopka is that the knock of grace must be heeded quickly, as the opportunity for deliverance will soon come to an end. Verse 13 of Numbers 33, and they departed from Dopka and camped at Alush. Alush means leavening or kneading with the dough. In the analogy representing God's people, the process of being kneaded in the Alush experience represents being completely permeated with a leavening agent. When the end-time people of Yahuah experience the tikkun or lesson of Alush, it is meant to totally permeate them with the sanctifying presence of Yahuah. However, if we are disconnected from Elohim, the Alush experience will serve to fully infuse us with bitterness and backbiting rebellion. The agent with which we are leavened in our Alush experience will be determined by whether we remain humble and submitted or become self-absorbed and disconnected after the victories of Dopka. In the end of time, the giants which threaten Yahuwah's people at Alush represent the threat of the global beast power soon to attack final Israel. Only if we remain trusting, faithful, and submitted to Elohim in the minor trials of Alush will we be enabled to stand victoriously when attacked by these giants. And they departed from Alush and camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. And they departed from Rephidim and camped in the wilderness of Sinai. And in Exodus 19:2, it says, for they set out from Rephidim and had come to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. That's where they'll end up at after leaving Rephidim. In Exodus 17, we read, and all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the mouth of Yahuah, and camped in Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore, the people strove with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses said to them, why do you strive with me? Why do you try Yahuah? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people grumbled against Moses and said, why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? Then Moses cried out to Yahuah, saying, what am I to do with this people? Yet a little, and they shall stone me. And Yahuah said to Moses, pass over before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, and go. See, I am standing before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people shall drink. And Moses did so before the eyes of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the strife of the children of Israel, and because they tried Yahuah, saying, is Yahuah in our midst or not? And then shortly after all that took place, in verse 8, we see, and Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Of course, we know the rock is representing Yahushua HaMashiach, who provides us living water. And Israel defeats Amalek. So we can expect that World War III will rise up in our day. We actually are expecting like 3 wars, aren't we? A possible World War III, and then the Battle of Armageddon, and then lastly, the Battle of Gog and Magog. And Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I am stationing myself on the top of the hill with the rod of Elohim in my hand. So that was the rod of Elohim. That was the rod empowered by Yahuah. And Moses used it and Aaron used it, but the power came from Yahuah. And Joshua did as Moses said to him to fight with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to be when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses's hands were heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And Yahuah said to Moses, write this for a remembrance in the book and recite it in the hearing of Joshua, that I shall completely blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under the heavens. And Moses built a slaughter place and called its name Yahuah Nissi. For he said, because a hand is on the throne of Yah, Yahuah is to fight against Amalek from generation to generation, meaning our generation as well. That was an epic battle that Joshua was in. And there's also another battle that sometimes I would confuse with this battle, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So this battle, of course, took place before later Joshua crosses the Jordan with the people. So there were battles on the east side of the Jordan and battles on the west side of the Jordan. But the other big battle that Joshua was involved in was when he fought against the 5 kings of the Amorites, listed there in verse 5. And then in verse 6, it says, and the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal, saying, do not withdraw your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have assembled against us. And Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the soldiers with him, and all the mighty brave men. And Yahuah said to Joshua, do not fear them. Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hand. Not one of them does stand before you. So then Joshua came upon them suddenly, having gone up all night from Gilgal. And Yahuah threw them into confusion before Israel, and they struck them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and pursued them along the way that goes to Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And it came to be as they fled before Israel and were on the descent of Beth Horon, that Yahuah himself here, that Yahuah threw down large hailstones from the heavens on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than those whom the sons of Israel had killed with the sword. Then Joshua spoke to Yahuah in the day when Yahuah gave the Amorites over to the children of Israel. And he said before the eyes of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ayalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? Thus the sun stopped in the midst of the heavens and did not hasten to go down for an entire day. And there has been no day like that before it or after it, that Yahuah listened to the voice of a man, because Yahuah fought for Israel. So Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. So this was the camp of Rephidim, the final campsite for this Torah portion. Rephidim is a Hebrew word with both a positive and a negative connotation. It can mean either the weakening or the strengthening of hands. It can also mean to spread them or scatter them. From Rephidim, we learn that we can be leavened by proxy, just by being in the midst of nations that have gone rogue, that have turned their back on Yahuah. This is the lesson at Rephidim. From Rephidim, we learn that we can be leavened by proxy, and that means leavened in not a good way. Those Israelites who bore the thirst quietly are unmentioned, although assuredly present. They shared, though, in the judgments which fell upon the complainers, just as Lot would have burned had he remained in Sodom. The problem with the water rebellion can be traced back to an unsubmitted sense of rights. The people were murderously enraged over the denial of their rights to water. For those facing this test in the latter days, we must display total submission to Elohim, as did Job. We are also to render praise to Yahuah throughout the trial rather than complaint. That's challenging, isn't it? Faith is defined as visualizing what Elohim intends to do in a given situation and acting in harmony with it. Faith's opposite is presumption, defined as prideful arrogance. By bickering, backbiting, and demonstrating wrath, ancient Israel lost the protection of Yahuah, foolishly opening themselves up to enemy attack. We also remove ourselves from Yahuah's protection when we engage in these bitter attitudes. Like the name suggests, the giants faced at ultimate Rephidim. Rephidim will either find Elohim's end-time people weakened and easily scattered, or through the spreading of hands in intercessory prayer, the saints will be strengthened and unconquerable. The battle of Rephidim is faced on two fronts. Those saints directly involved in the valley of conflict are strengthened and supported by the prayers of the intercessors on the mountain. So Joshua was fighting that physical battle, and Moses was fighting the spiritual battle by keeping his hands lifted high. Exodus 19:4, you have seen what I did to the Mitzrites and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And he will do that again, because in Revelation 12:14, and the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time from the presence of the serpent. We most certainly will know the end from the beginning. So Shabbat Shalom. Until next Sabbath, have a blessed week.